Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
This is Becoming UnDone.
Identity that's a really good conversation. So when I was a kid, we moved around a bunch. My dad was transferred and I had moved like 7 or 8 times before we settled down Northeast Ohio. And I think from that, a lot of my identity was in other people's opinions and approval of me. So I think my identity, I missed playing football. So when I finished the album, I came home. I was on like cloud 9. All my buddies are happy. They're like, wow, this is really going to happen. And then probably 3 weeks after we had made the video, or a month, I get the call that Gerald Busby resigned. And Mike's like, listen, we're going to give you a stipend. We're going to try and kind of figure out what we want to do. But that time started to go by longer and longer, and I had gotten the bug that, I could do this. So I was still kind of holding on to the Michael Bivins dream. But then a shift happened, and I got a call from 3 guys out of New Jersey who had gotten my number, and they're like, hey, we have a group. At the time, they were called Protege, and they said, hey, we want to meet you. Like, we heard things aren't working out with Michael Bivins. I decided at that point, I said, I think I'm going to break away from Michael Bivins and I'm going to pursue this. And I called Michael and we had a conversation. This was a long time ago, right? And I have never talked to him since. He hasn't talked to me since that time. It was, it felt like a breakup. Alcohol was always something that I think affected me differently, but I don't think I really opened up the Pandora's box when I was signed to Columbia, because I was very focused. I wanted to be an artist and make music, but I was never about becoming famous. I wanted to make music because I loved music. I wanted to make a lot of money and then retire and play golf. But when our deal with Columbia didn't follow through, it really devastated me. And that's when my addiction really kicked in. Hi, my name's Hayden Hajdu and I am Undone.
July 28th, 1992. I was wrapping up the final month between my junior and senior year of high school. And at the time, I was working as a dishwasher at a local bed and breakfast not far from my school. And I was practicing. I spent much of that summer on the court behind my house. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I always blamed that court, however, on my lack of deep shooting range. It had been a chicken coop in years before, so there was this small shed that opened up onto this concrete pad that at one point had all been caged in so that the chickens could go inside for protection from the weather or outside so that it was cooler. But by the time I was a high schooler, the chickens were long gone, and what was left was that shed and probably a 20 by 15 slab of concrete and my basketball goal. Now keep in mind that a regulation three-pointer for high schoolers is 19 feet 9 inches. My pole overhung the pad by a little bit, and then there was the wall of the shed. So honestly, I'd say I'm a pretty solid shooter from 18 feet in. But beyond that, I was either out in the grass on the wings, or I was backed all the way up to the shed wall, which was about 19 feet or less from the bucket at the top of the key. Anyhow, congrats. You just got my analysis of why in my high school career, I think I was exactly 0 for 1 from three-point range. Correlation doesn't equal causation, but still, you can see it, right? Anyway, one thing I had to have at practice was music. So this was a pre-AirPod era. So like in grade school, middle school, I would walk out with my dual cassette deck, but eventually I had a CD player boombox, right? Put it out on the court and I'd listen to my pick of the day. I'd take 3 or 4 CDs out there with me. In those days, common choice probably would have been NWA or LL Cool J, Rex and Effect, Bell Biv DeVoe, Boyz II Men, maybe Third Base. I had heard about this new CD coming out that had been put together by Michael Bivins called East Coast Family, and I was all in. The summer before, Cooley High Harmony had come out, and even though we didn't really have MTV at my house, my friends who did were talking about the Motown Philly video that included Boyz II Men, ABC, Another Bad Creation, a group of young kids in awesome era-perfect starter gear, and a group of 5 white dudes who you don't hear sing, but you see them flash across the screen as Sudden Impact. Now, the backstory to Sudden Impact is the subject of one of my all-time favorite podcasts, Dave Holmes' Waiting for Impact. Dave did this masterful job. 10-episode limited series does a deep dive on what happened to Sudden Impact and why, despite being featured in one of the biggest music videos of the year in 1991, we never really got to hear what happened to Sudden Impact. Honestly, the series is pop culture journalistic gold, if you ask me. And if you listen to my show, you'll hear where I got some of my production ideas from Dave's masterful storytelling. I'll never do it as well as Dave, I know that, but I love the way that he inserts story and insight and he weaves context into the interviews. It's a way harder way to do a podcast for sure, but I think it's the only way to do my guests and their stories justice. So back to 1992. I can't recall if I bought the East Coast Family CD outright at a store. I didn't do that very often. More likely I ordered it from BMG or Columbia House Music Club. For those of you too young to know about it, before there was streaming, you had to buy all your music. And it wasn't cheap, especially on a dishwasher salary. $15 to $20 was common for a CD. And more often than not, we hadn't heard more than a song or two on the radio unless a friend had bought that copy ahead of us. But the opening track on that East Coast Family CD that stood out right away was the intro song, a posse track called 1 for All for One. Within it, producer Michael Bivins compiled his massive and growing stable of young artists together for a song that showcased not just what he had in Boyz II Men and ABC and BBD, but what you could expect in the months and years ahead. Rappers, vocal groups, R&B solo acts. Headliners included established artists like Boyz II Men and ABC. Their debut albums had been released the year prior, and then MC Brains had an album in 1992, just a few months before the East Coast Family. So we had these 3 solid albums before East Coast Family, then the compilation album that was really good. It was full of other new artists we hadn't heard from yet. It was only natural to think, as I'm thumbing through these liner notes, that every one of them are going to be big stars too. They were stars in the making. Unfortunately for most, that stardom never came. Or if it did, it arrived much differently than expected under the banner of Biv 10. Now, I Googled it and I was surprised to learn that in total, Biv 10 produced around 20 albums. Girl Group 702 is the only one I had really heard of, other than Belle Biv DeVoe, who released their album BBD through Biv 10 in 2000. The label officially folded back into Motown Records in 2002. Now, I'll tell you, as a 17-year-old kid from Illinois, I remember being excited about this stable of new artists that were all destined for R&B and hip-hop stardom. To me, it was a sure thing based on what I'd seen so far from Michael Bivins. However, for most, it didn't happen. And in that moment for me, I remember being disappointed that I didn't get to hear albums from those groups that were spotlighted in that video. But what I was too young and too self-centered to notice at that time was that while it might be disappointing for me, if you were living it, it must have been hell. To think that you're aligned with one of the biggest names in the music industry in 1992 and then basically be out on the street just a year or two later with no record deal. Most with half-done or partially done projects that they couldn't take with them to other record labels because Biv 10 and Motown owned the music. As I listened to Dave tell the story of Sudden Impact, tracking down other Biv 10 artists and other pop icons of the era, I couldn't help but wonder about all the others. How many of them had had their early shot at stardom tantalizingly dangled in front of their noses before things beyond their control led those visions of stardom to be snatched away? That was an undone story if ever I had heard one. One of those artists was Hayden Hajdu, who during the Biv 10 years simply went by Hayden. And Hayden looked nothing like what he sounded like to me. He looked like a Midwestern college kid who might have just stepped out of a fraternity photo shoot. Then he opened his mouth. If Biv 10 was assembling its roster to fill particular lanes, Hayden seemed destined to occupy one all his own. A kind of Elvis for a new generation, delivering that blue-eyed soul that, to my ears, sounded kind of like Brian McKnight. He had range, he had soul. His vocal runs were ridiculous. The problem was you couldn't really know any of that from the 2 lines that he was given on 1 for All for One. And that was kind of the point. At the time, of course, those 2 lines felt like a preview. Hayden was one of several artists on that record who seemed to be waiting just off stage for their turn. And if you were following Biv 10 in 1992, there was every reason to believe that that turn was coming. For some, it did. For others, things got quite a bit more complicated. That was what pulled me into Dave Holmes' Waiting for Impact in the first place. The sudden impact story was fascinating all on its own, but it also made me wonder. Inside the CD, there's a poster with a photo of countless artists. In the video, you can see them. And the question that came to my mind is, what happened to the rest of them? Not just the sudden impact guys, but everyone involved went from thinking they were on the threshold of stardom to seeing the record label fold in front of their eyes. Hayden's story turned out to be one of the ones I most wanted to hear, because this isn't really a conversation about a record label that disappeared or an album that should have come out. It's about talent and timing and ambition and identity and disappointment and faith, and what happens when the life you pictured for yourself starts moving in a direction you never expected. Hayden's story took some turns that I didn't know about when I first heard those two lines back in 1992. And I'd venture a guess he had no idea it was going to go that way either. And our conversation went places I wasn't expecting when we sat down to talk. By now, I guess I should tell you that this is Becoming UnDone, and I'm your host, Dr. Toby Brooks, speaker, author, professor, and performance scientist. I spent much of the last 2 decades working as an athletic trainer and strength coach in the professional, collegiate, high school sports settings. And over the years, I've grown more and more fascinated with what sets high achievers apart, and how failures that can suck in the moment can end up being exactly the push we needed to propel us on our path to success. Each week on Becoming UnDone, I invite new guests to examine how high achievers can transform from falling apart to falling into place. I'd like to emphasize that this show is entirely separate from my role at Baylor University, but it's my attempt to apply what I've learned and what I'm learning, and to share with others about the mindsets of high achievers. This week, I'm thrilled to bring you the story of vocalist Hayden Hajdu. I hope you'll enjoy our conversation in episode 163. Let's get into it. Greetings and welcome back. Becoming UnDone is a podcast for those who dare bravely risk mightily and grow relentlessly. Join me, Toby Brooks, as I invite a new guest each week where we examine how high achievers can transform from falling apart to falling into place. Thrilled to have a guest with me today. We've been working for a long time to make this one happen, and it took some doing, but I finally have Hayden Hajdu in the studio today. And Hayden is a recording artist who has quite a story with Biv 10 Records and with the record industry in general. And first came across your work with Dave Holmes' podcast about waiting for impact. So Hayden, I'm really thrilled to have you here today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Toby. I appreciate it. And you got my last name right, so that's pretty good. So not an easy one to get.
I meant to ask before we got started, so I'm glad to hear that. I don't always do that. Well, I always start off with a little bit of a softball. Take me back to the beginning. As a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up, and why?
Yeah. So, I grew up in the normal, kind of nuclear family, had a great mom and dad, I have a younger sister. So growing up, we traveled quite a bit, but I was very into sports. So I think as a young kid, I wanted, I inspired, like any young kid, wanted to play college football and, maybe wanted to be a pro football player. I think when I was younger, I was a big Tony Dorsett fan for the Dallas Cowboys. So I was born in Austin. So early on, I was a big Cowboys fan, Tom Landry years. So yeah, really my life was really about sports. And then I just grew up in a family that could always sing. So that was kind of second nature. But I thought I was going to go off and play college football somewhere and do that. And that was kind of just, I think a faraway dream that I had. So
yeah. I also grew up a Cowboys fan. Kind of a highlight for me. I'm an athletic trainer by trade, and I worked with the Raiders in 2002, and Anthony Dorsett was on our roster. And I look over and there's Tony. Dad is there to watch practice. So I'm right there with you. I didn't grow up in Texas, but that was America's team back then. So I can certainly relate.
Yeah. I'm not a Cowboys fan now. I'm a diehard Browns fan and a Buckeyes fan, but I was a Cowboys fan back then.
Well, I love that aspect of your story. As I was listening to Dave's interview with you, how athletics and being in the arts, especially when you and I were growing up, was really seen as two different things. Theater kids didn't hang out with the jocks, but you really were able to kind of live in both of those spaces. So kind of talk me through as that Biv 10 record deal kind of came about, who was Hayden in those high school years and when you were navigating that space between, am I an athlete? Am I an artist? Am I both? What was that like for you?
Yeah. So, high school for me, I mean, I was a football player. I was, pretty good. I wasn't great. Had an opportunity to play at a, Division III and a couple of, like NAIA Division II schools if I wanted to. And then, I was a kid who could sing. So, I really wasn't into like the drama club or anything like that. I sang in the choir and I did some solos, but my senior year, they had this play Bye Bye Birdie, and the director of the drama club said, "Hey, I have a part for you if you want to do it." And I really didn't want to. And my parents were like, you should do it. I ended up doing it. And then a couple of other kids on the football team did it, and we had a good time. And then, I was just a guy who was, going to go to Ohio University. I ended up just deciding to go to college and just be a college kid. And then in the summer of 1991, that was when Michael Bivins had discovered Boyz II Men, and Bell Biv DeVoe was on this Budweiser tour with MC Hammer and a couple of the other artists. And whenever Michael Bivins was somewhere, people would go and sing for him. And a buddy of mine, Keith Weaver, who lives in Atlanta now, he called me at like 1 a.m. and he's like, "Hey, you got to get down here. Like all these people are singing for, Michael Bivins." And I knew who he was because I was really into like R&B and gospel. That's kind of what I grew up on. So I went to a hotel and there was like 20 people auditioning or 25, and the hotel lobby was full, and he was exiting to leave, and my buddy said, "Hey, we got one more for you." And he goes, "All right." He thought it was my buddy. My friend is African American. He thought he was going to sing for me. It was me. And I was in sweats and a t-shirt, and I sang something, and he kind of smiled, and then I was like, "Oh, that maybe didn't go the way I wanted." And then he's like, "Sing something else," and I sang something else, and then he had me sing something else, and then all these people started cheering and clapping, and then he wrote down my number on a little gum wrapper, and he goes, "Hey, I'm going to call you." And I was like, "Whatever," and I just went about my business. And then about 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from Michael Bivins, and I thought it was a joke. I thought it was one of my buddies, and I said, "Okay," and I hung up. And then he called back, and he's like, "No, this is Michael Bivins. I'm going to call you back in 2 weeks, and I want you to write a song, and I want you to sing it for me." And I had never written a song, and then I ended up writing a song. And then he called me at like 2 a.m, and I ran down to my basement. I was at my parents' house, and I sang the song, and he's like, "Hey, I'm going to offer you a record deal."
Now, this was a crazy time in the American record industry, and particularly for Michael Bivins. Biv was a founding member of New Edition, and when members like Bobby Brown and Ralph Tresvant and Johnny Gill all started spinning off to do their own solo deals, Ricky Bell, Michael Bivins, and Ronnie DeVoe, Bell Biv DeVoe, formed their own group. Their debut album Poison in 1990 was a massive hit, going certified quadruple platinum, meaning it sold over 4 million copies. One of those was mine, probably BMG if I had to guess. It was a personal favorite of mine at the time, because what 16-year-olds shouldn't be singing "Do Me Baby," right? You can do me when you wanna do me. The album peaked at number 5 on the Billboard Top 200, and it was number 1 on the R&B and hip-hop charts. Not long after, Bivins began dreaming of a progression in his career from artist to producer, becoming a Quincy Jones for his generation, or in more modern terms, kind of a forerunner to Sean Puffy Combs years later. Anyway, at this time, the model for landing a record deal with Bivins apparently was to lightly stalk him in various hotels in various cities and then just sing for him. The phenomenon even found its way into the music of One for All for One. For Hayden, it meant dropping what he was doing when he heard Bivins was in town and heading down to try his hand at the Michael Bivins gateway to the record industry. Using a highly technical system that involved a phone number scribbled on a gum wrapper, miraculously, it worked. Almost unbelievably, the BBD star called him back. And then he called him back again when Hayden hung up on him because he thought it was a prank. But before long, Hayden had a record deal. It would be the start of Hayden's journey in the record business.
And I was like, I don't even really know what that is, but, let's go. And he ended up offering me a record deal. So when I left for I had signed my first record deal. And so I didn't go through like the hardship of like, doing bars and doing scenes like that. I sang for a guy and got offered a record deal. So, I'd signed a record deal before I went to OU. So I didn't take college very seriously at that point in time. And then I really started like kind of really gravitating towards like the music side and doing those things. But growing up, I was just your normal kid who, I was singing in the choir and I could always sing, and I sang at pep assemblies, or like if we would go to parties, my boys would be like, hey, you need to sing for this girl or something like that. But I just grew up in a house, on my mom's side, everybody sings. So I grew up in a world where everyone sings, they all, I have a cousin who's a pastor of a church in Lubbock, and his three brothers and his sister sang, and my mom could sing. And, it was just singing in harmony and things like that. So that was just kind of normal for me. I didn't think that I was better than anyone else. I just knew I had this talent, but it really wasn't something that I think defined me at all. And then when it started to define me more as I started to get the record deal and getting more attention. I think it just became a priority, and it was kind of who I was becoming, right? Like I was a singer and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I have to wonder, I mean, you're showing up to campus with a record deal in your pocket. I mean, what's your attitude like? Are you kind of insufferable and arrogant? Or are you still finding your way as an artist? What's Hayden like when he shows up as an undergrad? Did college really factor into your future plans at that point? Or were you already thinking like, this music thing is really what I'm going to pursue?
Yeah. So no, college did not, I was going down there to hang out, go to the bars, have fun. I grew up in a Christian home, but like that wasn't a priority for me at all. I was, I had joined a fraternity and I was doing those things. It's funny. I was never arrogant about my music. I think, and what I'm going to say may sound arrogant, but I think I was very secure in who I was, and I knew that it was something that I could do. So I was never arrogant or didn't really talk about it a bunch. I'm sure some nights where I had a lot to drink and I was talking to a girl, I'm sure I brought it up because, I'll take any help I can get. But it wasn't like I went around saying, oh, I have a record deal or all these things. But no, I think I was going to college not to really take it seriously to begin with. And then that was kind of the domino where I was like, I'm not going to take it serious. So, I lasted a year at OU. And at that point, I was having to leave and go to LA to do some things. So it wasn't something that I was serious about. But a lot of the people that lived in my dorm and things like that, like, they didn't know I could sing. I had some fraternity brothers who went to high school with me. And so when sororities would come over, they would have me, go out on the porch and sing for them. But that wasn't like something I was arrogant about. I would have much rather talk to you about, how good I thought I was at football. I was probably more insecure about that, but I was pretty secure. And, that's just never been something that I have friends today that don't know that I was signed to Biv 10 Records or Columbia Records. Someone else brings it up. That's just, that was never, I think I was just very assured and confident in my own abilities. So, no, but I was arrogant for other reasons that I shouldn't have been arrogant for. If that makes sense.
I appreciate that honesty. We spend a lot of time on this show talking about identity and how early successes, especially in something like sports or the arts, where you don't spend, 3 decades doing those things, can be taken from you really quickly. And I have to wonder, you're moving toward this career as an artist, but you've also left behind football and athletics. How was that switch, that navigation? Like, where was your identity during that freshman year? Were you still grieving the loss of sports, or were you so enamored with what was potentially ahead that it maybe didn't hurt as bad?
No, identity that's a really good conversation. So when I was a kid, we moved around a bunch. My dad was transferred and I had moved like 7 or 8 times before we settled down in Northeast Ohio. And I think from that, a lot of my identity was in other people's opinions and approval of me. So I think my identity, I missed playing football, but I wasn't one of these, crazy kids who I think there was a dream that I was going to play D1. That wasn't going to happen. And then I don't even know if I would have gone to like a D3 school if I would have made it with all the hard work, right? I really enjoyed the accolations that I got from it, but really I really I really had an issue where I really wanted to please people. And if you didn't like me, I was going to talk to you about why you should like me. You know, I think I was one of those guys who didn't stand for anything and was falling for everything. So I was still getting some of that. I think getting the attention from that piece, I think, was fulfilling a false need that I had in myself, where like people's opinions and approval were a big part of what I thought was a great identifier for me, but ended up, I think, down the road, probably causing me more pain than it did any good.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that insight.
Yeah.
I know from an outsider's perspective, I was in high school in 1990, 91, and, you know, Boys to Men splash on the stage.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And they're everywhere. And in their video, famously, the Sudden Impact guys are there with their point.
Yeah.
And I remember getting this East Coast Family CD.
Yeah. Yep.
And then the 1 for All for One video comes out, and it's almost like a Marvel Cinematic Universe that Michael Bivins has created, where he's got all these different superheroes who are emerging artists that you haven't heard about, but you can't wait to hear about.
Right.
And ABC comes on the stage, you know, they're kind of shortly thereafter. MC Brains. I mean, there's some record deals coming out of this, but in watching the video, it's this posse track where it's like, I can't wait to hear from all these artists. They're all like on deck, and the next record's going to drop, and you're in there. So kind of talk me through that transition from a hotel lobby audition to showing up on stage to record this massive posse track video.
So I think Mike had signed Boys to Men, then he had signed Another Bad Creation. He had signed MC Brains. I think he started to have some success. At that time, I think I was one of the artists that he had found while he was on tour. I think and I don't know this, you know, I mean, we've talked about it, but I think he was starting to sign all these artists. And I think his goal was like, I'm going to create this new Motown, right? Biv 10 Records. And I think during that time period, I think, you know, Motown was under some changes and things were going on. And I think he was, at least for me, I think he was confused because, you know, I was this white kid who didn't really look like a kid who would sing at all, right? Like you wouldn't pick me out of the guy who, you know, I always joke there's a picture in that thing where it's like me standing with everyone and I look like the janitor in the back who just got to walk up on the picture. So, and, you know, growing up in like a Southern Pentecostal church, you have, you know, you develop some soul because you're singing in a church where it's spirit led and a lot of worship. And that's kind of been the backbone, you know, that's how my family always kind of, you know, that's kind of how we sang. I think he struggled with, where does he put me, right? Am I going to be in the R&B side of things, a white guy, where there weren't a lot of white guys crossing over? I mean, there was a guy on Motown at the time, Tim Miner, who's a great gospel artist now. So he put me in this group with Yvette Brown and Kali Brock and someone else, and the name of the group was different, and we tried that out and it didn't work. And then I think finally for me, you know, I don't know where Sudden Impact went, but he had actually kind of prioritized me completing an album that was just titled Hayden. And it was really, I mean, the look that he had for me was sort of like a newer version of Elvis, not with the sideburns, but sort of that look. And we completed the album and we shot the video. And then at the time, Gerald Busby, who was the CEO of Motown, he resigned. So they kind of shelved my project, but it was a very unorganized kind of cluster of all these artists. And I don't know how he would have pushed all of these artists through, but I think that was kind of his envision. But I think when Gerald Busby resigned and those things happened, I think everybody kind of went their separate ways.
I hope you caught that. Hayden didn't just have a record deal. He had a completed album. He'd shot a video even. And then just weeks before it was supposed to come out, Motown chief executive Gerald Busby resigns. Through no fault of Hayden's own, the project stalls. And this is one of the brutal realities of the record business. Hayden couldn't simply pick up the recordings and take them somewhere else. The label owned the entire project. So all that work, all that time, all that momentum suddenly stopped, while the finished album sat unreleased. For years, much of that material was essentially impossible to hear. But more recently, it got posted to YouTube, where the account Mr. Music in Review has posted a few of the surviving recordings. They aren't pristine production quality copies, but they're more than good enough to hear what Bivins apparently heard in Hayden in that hotel lobby in the first place. To my ears, there are moments that do sound a lot like Brian McKnight or Babyface, but Hayden had his own thing going too. Have a listen.
Without you by my side, my life would have no meaning, and the thoughts in my mind would be few. And I'm sure this is love, the way I feel about you, there could never, ever be.
Yeah, the soul is there. The voice is there. Whatever you think about what might have happened with the album, it's pretty easy to understand why a major label thought Hayden had something. The problem was that for the moment, his career had been put on hold by circumstances he couldn't control.
You know, I was probably the third or fourth artist that he, you know, like we were going to, like the album was going to come out. You know, like I remember coming home from LA and like, my album's going to drop in a month. And then I got the call that Gerald Busby resigned. So I had to kind of move on and, you know, kind of do some, I was still in music, but where I moved kind of shifted.
Yeah. And so at this point, you've put your college pursuits on hold. You're doing
They're
music.
not even, they're done. Yeah. College was done for me at that point. Yeah.
So you've chosen this path and everything looks like it's a go. I mean, the video is a massive success.
Yeah.
It's sad. I don't think the CD is available on streaming. That's why I think I bought this disc. We've moved several times in the past couple of years, and I've been kind of working on this Biv 10 project off and on. So I think I bought this CD like 4 times off eBay.
Yeah.
But it's not on streaming platforms. There's a version of a Boyz II Men song that isn't available anywhere else. I mean, this is a really cool compilation, and all signs from the outside are pointing to massive success. You have to think that like my album's done. It's literally just a matter of they need to put it for sale. So mentally, what's going through your mind at this stage when Gerald had resigned and your record's done? And is it just a matter of time, or were you starting to let fear maybe step into the equation a little bit?
Yeah. So when I finished the album, I came home. I was on like cloud nine. You know, all my buddies are happy. They're like, wow, this is really going to happen, you know. And then probably 3 weeks after we had made the video, or a month, I get the call that Gerald Busby resigned. And Mike's like, listen, we're going to give you a stipend. We're going to try and kind of figure out what we want to do. So I think they were giving me like $2,500 a month, which, you know, in 1993 was enough for me to live on and play golf. And, you know, I was still living at home. So I wasn't even trying to find a job. You know, I was getting a check once a month, but that time started to go by longer and longer. And I had gotten the bug that, you know, I could do this. So I was still kind of holding on to the Michael Bivins dream. But then a shift happened and I got a call from 3 guys out of New Jersey who had gotten my number, and they're like, hey, we have a group. At the time they were called Protege. And they said, hey, we want to meet you. Like, we heard you know, like things aren't working out with Michael Bivins, and a guy named David Kokakis, who's pretty high up now with the record label. He was kind of their lawyer and managing them. So they drove down and we sang together and we spent the weekend together, and we were very similar. They were all athletes in high school, and, you know, they grew up in Jersey. They were a little younger than I. So they were like in the theater and in acting, you know, they were like, that was more common in that area. And we sang, and then I decided at that point, I said, you know, I think I'm going to break away from Michael Bivins and I'm going to pursue this. And I called Michael and we had a conversation. This was, I don't know, a long time ago, right? And I have never talked to him since. He hasn't talked to me since that time. It was, it felt like a breakup. It was pretty bad. And I think he was upset, but it had been a year, I'd been waiting around for like a year. I needed to move on. And so, we created a demo and then we started to get some inroads. And then, we were signed. We changed our name to Sygnature, Sygnature. And then we were signed by Columbia Records. And that's really where that started to take off even a lot more than the Biv 10 East Coast family.
Good news, bad news. First, the bad news. The Motown Biv 10 record is finished, but it gets shelved permanently. Hayden's still getting paid while Bivins tries to figure out what comes next, but by this point, Hayden has had his taste of what this career might actually become, and he's not interested in just waiting around indefinitely. Then the good news arrives. An opportunity comes along for Hayden to become the lead vocalist for a group, first called themselves Protégé and then later Sygnature with a Y. They eventually signed with Columbia Records, and their music is still available on Spotify and Apple today. After our interview, I went back and listened to the entire Sygnature catalog, and it's good. It's really good. And hearing it makes it even easier to understand why Michael Bivins had picked Hayden out of a hotel lobby in the first place. Unfortunately for Hayden, though, his unpleasant collisions with the record business weren't over yet. Another one was coming, and this one involved a manager by the name of Matthew Knowles. Maybe you've heard of him. Maybe you've heard of his daughter. She's an obscure pop act who today simply goes by her first name, Beyonce.
So, we started working on an album, and then Matthew Knowles, Beyonce's dad, was our manager, and he was managing us. And that's where my career started to really it looked like it was about to take off. It looked like it was about to take off and there was going to be something there. So I was, I had kind of broken away from the Biv 10 East Coast family thing and was pursuing that. And then I'd moved to New Jersey and we got a house and we were working on an album. So there was a shift there, but I have not, I've reached out to Mike a few times. He hasn't returned my calls and that's okay. But yeah, after that conversation, we didn't talk anymore. And I don't think any artists came out after that, Yvette Brown has done really well in the acting side of things. And she went out and I think she might, her and I are still pretty close. I love her. She's kind of like a sister to me.
That's actress Yvette Nicole Brown, if you're wondering. Her vocals on 1-4-All-for-One are phenomenal, but you may know her from her more recent pursuits that involve acting more than singing. But in Dave's show, she mentions that even though acting has become her career, she sings in most all her parts. Of all her roles, most notably Community, where she played Shirley Bennett, is what she's probably best known for. I'm still trying to connect with Yvette so that she can tell her Biv 10 story here on the show, but no luck just yet. Yvette, if you're listening, I can't wait to tell your story too.
I'm not sure her relationship with Mike, but I haven't talked to Mike and, I've reached out a few times, but have not talked to him.
Yeah. Well, I have to think you're learning lessons the hard way about the record industry. I had Garfield Bright on the show, a member of Shy, and he mentioned, it's the record business and the business side of things. So steamrolled so many folks. I think not long after your interview with Dave, you actually found some of that original work and posted it to YouTube, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Well,
incredible stuff.
Yeah. That's stuff that I posted. So that stuff, there's like I posted it, and that was from the Motown album that I did when I was with Michael. Now you can go on iTunes and you can look up our name, and our album is still on iTunes. Sygnature. If you go Sygnature, you can listen to the album, and it's actually really good. And, Columbia spent a lot of money on us to make that record.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And it's just a tragedy that the work is done and it's just sitting on a shelf somewhere waiting for someone to sell it. And that day never comes. You've been forthright and transparent about how addiction started to enter the equation. Yeah. What role did this kind of dream unfulfilled play in that? And what did you learn during that process about yourself as a person, and maybe how did that spill over into addiction?
We'll be back after this quick message.
Have you ever looked in the mirror and thought, what in the hell just happened to my life? When the career shifts, when the relationship ends, when the identity you've built your whole life around disappears overnight. That's not failure. That's what I call a purpose storm. And most high achievers aren't prepared for it because no one ever taught us how to train for a comeback. I'm Dr. Toby Brooks, and I built the science of the comeback for people who refuse to stay broken. Inside the app, you'll find research-backed resilience training, daily prompts and guided reflection tools, performance psychology frameworks, identity rebuilding exercises, and personalized structured pathways to move from burnout and confusion to clarity and momentum. It's not hype. It's neuroscience. It's performance science. And it's hard-won experience. If you're listening to Becoming UnDone, I created a special offer just for you. For the next 3 months, you can get full access for just $49 for an entire year, or just $5 a month with no obligation. You can cancel at any time. That's less than the price of a cup of coffee to start rebuilding your life on purpose. Your comeback isn't accidental. It's intentional. Start yours today at scienceofthecomeback.com.
So when we were signed to Columbia, I was not feeding into my alcoholism, right? I think I was born with, I think, a gene. I don't know, I've been sober for a long time. I've done Alcoholics Anonymous. I've been in rehab. There's theories like you can be born an alcoholic, which I'm not opposed to. Just like, you inherit your dad's sins. You've heard this expression, he's got his dad's temper, or, his dad gambled too. Alcohol was always something that I think affected me differently, but I don't think I really opened up the Pandora's box when I was signed to Columbia because I was very focused. I wanted to be an artist and make music, but I was never about becoming famous. I wanted to make music because I loved music. I wanted to make a lot of money and then retire and play golf. I was very focused in that time period. But when our deal with Columbia ended up following, it didn't follow through. It really devastated me. And that's when my addiction really kicked in. And I think it was a blessing because I think either way, I would have suffered from alcoholism at one point or another because something else would have disappointed me. Mm-hmm. But I think if I would have been an artist who would have been making money and been around people that couldn't be honest with me, I probably would have been dead. So, it was tough, but, Matthew Knowles and I didn't see eye to eye on a few things. And I made a decision that, there were just some shady things going on that I had recognized from being in the industry before. And I made up my mind that I was going to go pursue a solo career. And at the time, my attorney was like, dude, there's 10 labels that want to sign you. I was starting to be well known in the industry, not outside of the industry, but people were, it was when, John B was coming out, and there was John B and Hayden Hajdu, and, there were some other things, and people had started to recognize me, and I was the lead singer of Sygnature, and those guys are all great. They've all had great careers, and they could all sing, and they were awesome, super supportive, and said, dude, go do your thing. We get it. But when I ended up leaving that, my attorney called me a few days later and said, listen, nobody wants to sign you. You're kind of being blackballed because of the decision you made. And, I had to make a decision at that point. Am I going to move to New York and pursue this? I had met a girl who's now my wife. We've been married 23 years. And I decided, I'm going to just go be a regular person at the time, what I thought. And, I went and started selling cars, and that was a devastating, very hard pill for me to swallow. And alcohol was the greatest elixir to kind of block all that out.
This revelation is heartbreaking to me. Hayden had already navigated the high hopes and the empty delivery of the Biv 10 deal. Undeterred, he found his footing with a new group, a new label, and a new manager. And just as it seemed like his career was finally starting to break through, he made the decision to step away and pursue a solo career. And then almost overnight, the opportunities that he had been told were waiting for him as a solo act evaporated. According to Hayden, his attorney told him that nobody wanted to sign him. He was being blackballed after the split by Knowles. But the words that hit me hardest were much simpler. I'm just going to go be a regular person, end quote. There's something brutal about that sentence to me. I'm not sure why, but we seem remarkably eager to pile shame onto people who dare to dream big and then don't end up where they thought they would. And I know from my own experience that when you make a big goal public and then fall short, the disappointment can get tangled up with embarrassment and shame in a way that's hard to shake. For Hayden, that season became filled with regret and disappointment and the weight of what might have been. And alcohol offered a way to numb some of the pain. But as it so often does, Hayden would find out it only made things worse.
It really allowed me to just not have to deal with what I was going through. You know, I had to be a grown up, like a real grown up, and I did not want to be a real grown up.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready for it.
Yeah. I appreciate that transparency. I know that's a hard thing. And at this point, you've got years invested into this career. And I have to think, like, back home, you're telling people like, hey, my album's going to drop in today. Oh, that doesn't happen. And now you're with Sygnature and they can maybe see that. Or, you know, you're right on the cusp of superstardom and then it doesn't happen and you come home. And I grew up in a small town. I mean, Cleveland's not a small town, but
where I'm from is a small town, though. I'm a suburb outside of Cleveland.
Yeah. So, I mean, I understand that. It's like if someone really is brave and launches out and has a big goal and then they come back home and they've failed, somehow that's worse than if you just stayed there in a lot of places. Was that your experience? Did you feel that shame of taking a big swing and not making it happen?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, you know, when we were signed to Columbia, we were on we were the opening act for the Christina Aguilera tour, and we were riding Destiny's Child's coattails because Matthew, Beyonce, was, you know, his daughter. So, I mean, we had played like, you know, now it's the Rocket Center, but where the Cats play. We had done a concert. We were the opening act to every one of my hometowns there. The Akron Beacon Journal did a big article on me and how I was going to make it. And then, you know, I'm coming home and now I'm like, you know, working at a restaurant and I'm selling cars. You know, I'm not behind a desk, like, not in front of people. You know, I'm an outgoing person, so I had to do something where I could make money. And it was like, you know, I could be a server and then I could, you know, I didn't have a college degree. I didn't have any real work experience. So I had to just take what I could get. But yeah, it was, you know, I was answering a lot of questions, and on the outside, you would think I was fine. Right. And my friends were like, are you okay? And I'm like, I'm okay. But as time went on, it was like, I wasn't okay. And I was, you know, I was really devastated and, I was hurt. And yeah, I think I had produced a lot of shame from that, you know, and shame is scary because shame is like a penance we give ourselves. You know, people jump off bridges because of shame, right? Yeah. And shame is something, and I had a lot of, I think I really felt like I had failed, and it was a tough pill to swallow. And you would never know it by talking to me, but I was not in a great place. I was in a dark place.
And isn't that so sad that becomes the mentality? Is, I mean, you're on a stage in front of thousands of people with stars and superstars, and yet somehow that gets twisted, and whether it's other people saying it or even within yourself, that's somehow failure, when, you know, it's success by, if you would have talked to 17-year-old Hayden and said, hey, I'm going to play at these shows you're playing at, you would have thought this was your wildest dreams come true.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't think my friends or people thought I had failed. It was what I had, you know, it was me internalizing that. I had created the failure inside of me. I don't, you know, I mean, I'm sure there were some people who were like, I never thought he would make it or anything like that, but I was good at my craft. When you're good at something and people can see that, I mean, it's not like, it'd be different if I was not good at it and they're like, well, you weren't that good, but I think people could see that I had ability, but I had created that in my own head that I had failed. I ended up building a lot of resentment, but a lot of that was like towards me, which is almost worse than like having someone else say it, because it was like the thoughts that were going on in my head and in my heart. And it got me in a bad place.
Right. Again, we're talking with Hayden Hajdu, vocalist, former Biv 10 Records vocalist. I have to think that going through this and in a sense, you said you kind of swallowed your pride and you've got to make a living. You're sorting through kind of the pieces of a career that never quite materialized, at least the way, in my opinion, it should have. Right. And I think I hear that in your voice as well, is that, man, it's frustrating when you see people with even objectively lesser talents have greater success. I mean, you see Boyz II Men become the highest selling artists in the world. They were in the same stable. Another Bad Creation has 2 record deals and you're selling cars. Right. Did you have a moment when you felt like my moment has passed me by? Like this is rock bottom in the aftermath of now 2 record deals that had kind of eaten you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I got married during that time period. And then when my wife got pregnant with my daughter, Hadley, I think that was like, well, I'm going to be a dad, you get married and you kind of grow up, but when you have a kid, it's, like if you're a parent and you have dreams and aspirations, you put them on the back burner for your kid. And I think at that moment I was like, I never, it's not a conversation that you have with yourself. It's like, kind of when you reach rock bottom, you look back. We have this saying in AA, it's like you got a bunch of junk in the bus and then you slam on the brakes and all the junk comes forward. And that's kind of when you start getting sober. I think that was a real, like, can I be a dad? How am I going to do this? And then I had also really, I developed, I'd become an alcoholic through all this and I was hiding it. And then it's like, well, wait, I can't really make a living. I really don't have skills. I can sing, but now I'm singing at karaoke. I'm hiding this secret from someone. And I think that was the first moment where I was like, I was really like, internally, I was in a bad place. I was in and I was just so far away from my relationship with Christ that I was just, it was a very lonely time period. You would see me out and I'd be around a ton of people and I'd be laughing and having fun, but inside I was like lonely and couldn't relate to anyone. And I just couldn't pick myself up by my bootstraps and like do anything. It's like I was just sinking and sinking and sinking. And so there was something bad I was on a path of something bad happening or, and it was a bad place, very bad place.
Yeah. My last guest was Daryl Strawberry, who is now, he's a minister. He works in evangelism. He's really turned his life around. But one thing he said that really stuck out with me, and I think it connects with something I heard you say, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. He said, my pain led to my success, but my success enabled my destruction. He said, becoming the first overall draft pick and the money and the fame and the accolades that came along with that really made it more likely for him to succumb to his addictions. And I heard you almost look back and say, I'm almost thankful in a way that I didn't have this massive success. Right. When you look back, do you feel like the record industry failed you? Do you feel like you were protected for something? Or do you really just feel like you were taught a difficult lesson about talent and timing? Like what's your perspective as you look back in 2026 on what happened to you 20 plus years ago?
Yeah, I don't think the record industry failed me because I think if it was like really something that I really, really wanted, I would have packed up my bags and moved to New York. And I think I could have pursued that. I think there was fear that kind of led to that. And, I think that I don't know if I was protected, but there was something holding me back from doing that. And I mean, today I think it was probably the grace of God, but I don't like throw my fist up and I'm like, the record industry failed me. I mean, there were some bad moments where I look back and say, if we would have had different management or we would have done this, but I'm not like, I'm past the point of any anger and resentment, because where I am today, I'm at such peace that it's like all of those things are things that I needed to happen. Like for me to get sober, I needed every drink, right? Like, I needed every sip to get sober. I don't learn lessons quickly, and I needed to get to a place where, I was at, like when you really have to surrender, you got to be in a pretty tough spot. And when I finally surrendered, I was where I needed to be. And look, where we are right now, that this part of my story, I'm still not at surrender. I'm like, hey, I need to get better because people are on my back. But yeah, I think some of that led to probably my destruction. But I think at the end of the day, I think it still goes back to like the need to really be loved by people and not wanting to disappoint people and thinking that was where my value was. Yeah. But I think, I agree with what Daryl says, like, sometimes that success can lead to your pain. And then all of that pain is kind of what you need to kind of turn your life around. I was very much like, we have this saying in AA, I'm not much, but I'm all I think about. I think that's kind of where I was, right? Like I was so wrapped up in my own crap that I couldn't be there for anyone else. And it's like, well, poor me, but all I could think about was just poor me. And I think that's where I was. And it was a very confusing period in my life.
Yeah, I bet. I don't know if you can see it over my shoulder. There's a plate. It's kind of dimly lit, but it's kintsugi. It's something my kids actually made for me. It's a Japanese art form where usually pottery, a plate or a bowl or something like that is broken. And then an artisan will press gold back in and basically put it back together. And it's more beautiful than it was when it was broken. And I love that picture. I mean, it really, to me, it's an image of restoration through Christ and how broken things aren't ruined. Broken things are broken and they can be put back together, and sometimes in a more beautiful way. So kind of talk me through your brokenness and what you feel like that's prepared you to do that success maybe wouldn't have.
Yeah. I love what you just said. I think we go through these periods where like, and I'll say for me, not everyone, but my will and God's will kept colliding. And I was like all about my will. And at the end of the day, it was because I wanted to keep on doing what I was doing. I first got sober in 2005, and I stayed sober for about 2.5 or 3 years. And I mean, I had to get sober. I had to go to the hospital, and they're like, you might need a liver transplant. Like I was drinking like from the morning until I was getting off work. I mean, I was in the 4 or 5 years that I'd hit rock bottom, I was consuming alcohol at a very high level. And so, I got sober, and they had to give me steroids to like help my body. And then they gave me this diuretic, and I lost like 70 pounds in 3 weeks. The diuretic was so strong. So then I'm starting to look good. And my attitude was like, yeah, I kind of did this, And it's funny. During that time period, I never asked God to take away my addiction because I think I was scared that he was going to. I think I was still holding on to this. Maybe I'm not an alcoholic. And I did not want to admit that I was an alcoholic because again, that was something else that I was failing at, right? I had failed. Nobody grows up and says, maybe I'll be an alcoholic and then that'll really help me, kind of turn my life around. Right. So, I had hit a bad place and I really wasn't able to surrender. But then through kind of going in and out of, I messed up. In 3 years, I went to my wife and said, hey, I've been sober for 3 years. I think I'm good. I think I hit a bad place, but now I'm good. And then I started drinking, and a month later, I'm right back to where I was, right? And I kind of battled that through for 3-something years. And then I was sober again. And then my mom died suddenly, which I was really close to her. And that was very painful. Within like a 4-day period, I had found out my mom had died. I had lost my job. I had a pretty good job. And my wife was pregnant with our 3rd and 4th kid, twins. And my whole world kind of collided. And being a good alcoholic who's faking recovery, the first thing that came to my mind was I was going to drink. So I ended up going to rehab. And at this point, I was really sick and tired of being sick and tired. And when I got into rehab, I was kind of feeling sorry for myself. And then at one point I had kind of made up my mind, I don't want to live like this. I threw my hands up and I said, God, if you want it, take it. I don't want it. And he did. I knew I had a lot of work to do, but that surrender for me was like, it was really the first time in my life that I was honest about who I really was, the brokenness that I had, and like that I needed a power greater than myself,
right,
to help me. And I think what's happened is, like you said, God had taken my broken pieces, but he has formed me in like the identity of who he is. And I think it's given me like a true testimony of like, I'm not perfect. I have flaws, but my identity is now in Christ. And what might look broken to everyone else looks great to my Savior because he already knew I was broken anyway. Right. And so I love that because I don't ever look at someone now like, like the famous, my wife and I always joke, we have all these pictures of our family and, us taking pictures with our kids and it looks great. Everyone's like, oh, your family looks great, but you should get us before the picture when we're like yelling at our kids, like, smile, just be normal. We're not messing up this picture, like the dysfunctionality that goes before the snap, right? And to me, that's really the beautiful thing. Like, take all the broken pieces, but mend them in the way that you want it to be mended.
Yeah.
And there's something beautiful about that. And so for me, I think, that plate that you talk about, that is like a representation of like, I got to stop trying to put the pieces back together and like God put the pieces back the way he sees fit. And I have to trust him and how that's going to look. And it might not look great to everybody else, but for him, it's the image of who he wants me to be,
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like Paul in the Bible, right? Like, Paul was in Corinthians and Galatians. He's saying, look, he wasn't the greatest speaker. He was a really short guy. He was beaten, battered, and bruised, and he had all these imperfections, but he was perfect in God's eyes, and he was willing to talk about those things. And he led a bunch of people to Christ because he was authentic and open. And it's like, we all have those stories. So yeah, I think sometimes what the world sees as imperfections in us, if we surrender those, God mends us back together in the way that he wants. So yeah, that plate that's awesome.
Yeah, I love that. As you're talking, and as I heard your story, even in Yvette's interview with Dave, she talks about how your album not being released is a tragedy, and that Blue-Eyed Soul was timely. And I've seen your videos since then. Michael Jordan was a great basketball player. I'm sure you'd say LeBron or whoever, but
no, I would say Michael Jordan.
Okay, I appreciate LeBron. That.
Yeah.
But those skills in athletes fade, and it's not like Michael Jordan could just throw a jersey on and be the Michael Jordan of 1993. But you are a vocalist. You still have that. How do you carry that around with you? I know you mentioned you could have advanced in the voice. Like, you've just chosen to leave this music behind in many ways. Talk me through kind of how you've come to that piece about its part in your journey.
Yeah, well, so I would say vocally, I'm not where I was because, the vocal is like a muscle, right? You got to work it a lot.
I appreciate the humility here, but take a listen to some of these raw but powerful clips I found on YouTube of Hayden. A guy who legitimately had the talent to become a household name in the 90s and 2000s. Now just a dad singing in his garage and recording it on a cell phone.
Lately I've had the strangest feeling, with no vivid reason here to find, but yet the thought of losing you's been hanging around my mind. Far more frequently you're wearing perfume, and with you say no special place to go. But when I ask will you be coming back soon, But no, I'm a man of many wishes. Hope my premonition misses. But what I really feel, my eyes won't let me hide, 'cause they always start to cry. 'Cause this time could mean goodbye. I get so weak in the knees, I can hardly speak. I lose all control. Something takes hold of me in a way. It is so amazing. It's not a phase. I want you to stay with me. By my side, I swallow my pride. Your love is so weak, it knocks me right off of my feet. Can't explain why your love, it makes me weak.
And then there's this incredible duet of one of my favorite worship songs, Oceans, with TikToker HH51. Hayden comes in second and he starts to add some harmonies toward the end of the clip. The cell phone mic is completely overmatched by the power of his voice, but somehow that almost makes it better to me. It feels unpolished and spontaneous, and within a few seconds, it just takes me immediately into a posture of worship.
Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters, wherever you will call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander. My faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. And I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace. For I am yours. Oh, you are mine.
Maybe that's the part of Hayden's story I find most compelling. The voice is still there, but the purpose behind it has changed. For a younger Hayden, singing was tied to the possibility of a career and a record deal and everything that might come by being heard by millions of people. Today, he seems way more at peace with the idea that the gift can still matter, even if the audience is smaller, and the stage looks completely different. Which brought me to a question I really wanted to ask him. When you still possess a gift that once seemed destined to define your life, how do you decide what place it should have in the life you're living now?
When my wife and when I came home from rehab, I was living with my dad and we were still married and we were going to counseling. And there were a lot of things we need to work out. And it wasn't just things I need to work out. Like my wife had some things she had to bring to the table too. So we spent a lot of time being patient and repairing our relationship. And then we both sort of committed ourselves to Christ and going to church. And then the church that we were at opened up a new church and we went there and we branched out, and I was leading worship, which was awesome. We were hosting a life group where we were in a Bible study every week, and my kids were starting to get older. And as they started to get involved in sports and all of those things, my pastor, Tony Lavigny, who I absolutely love, who's, one of my closest friends and is a guy that I can be honest with him and he can be honest with me. He's just an amazing guy. He came up to me and he said, "Hey, you need to be there for your kids. I love what you're doing. And in church, if you volunteer, they'll take anyone they can get they need it." But he really was like, you don't want your kids to be resentful of the church because you're putting in all that time. So at that moment, I sort of got out of worship, and the struggle for me with leading worship was I'm always there trying to surrender to God in that moment. But there's a part of me that's always concerned with like how I sound, because for some reason in the rest of my life, I don't need perfection. But when it came to music, like like I've never heard even a vocal where I'm like, oh, that's great. I'm always like, I could have done this, could have done that. It's like, so I think as I kind of, that was 10 years ago, as I've kind of put that behind me. I mean, I'll still once in a while sing, but like my kids sing, and that's not something that like I haven't pushed that on them, but like my daughter has an awesome voice. My boys can all sing. So, I mean, sometimes we'll sit around, but like at this point, I'm like, people will say, hey, will you sing at my wedding? And I'm like, have my daughter sing.
Not that you needed any more proof that music runs in the Hajdu family, but take a listen to Hayden's daughter, Hadley, absolutely crushed her rendition of the national anthem before one of her basketball games. She's standing there in uniform, about to go play, and you can hear that unmistakable Hajdu soul in her voice. Then right at the end of this stirring rendition, you can hear her dad, who's holding the phone. You can hear him in the background say, yeah, baby. I have to imagine that as gratifying and tantalizingly close as Hayden's own career came to superstardom, moments like this hit different. Michael Bivins once described him as straight American bandstand type pop. He'd opened for Christina Aguilera, shared stages and circles with artists who would become global icons, and he got closer to the life he had imagined than most people ever will. And yet, by his own telling, none of that ultimately gave him what he thought it would. In the years that followed, disappointment, addiction, faith, surrender, they all reshaped the way Hayden understood both his talent and himself. What once seemed like a broken story became, through Christ, something more like restoration and redemption. There's something pretty special about seeing the gift continue in your kids, while being able to stand in the background, let them have the moment, and simply be the proud dad, yelling, yeah, baby.
So, I mean, sometimes we'll sit around, but like at this point, I'm like, people will say, hey, will you sing at my wedding? And I'm like, have my daughter sing. She's amazing. She's 22. Honestly, like where I'm at in my life now, I really couldn't be happier because I love being a dad. I love being a husband. I love being a part of my church, but like not being seen by the world, but just kind of, doing the things that I do. And look, my kids are all really good athletes. So I have this expectation for them that I want them to do really good in sports, but then it becomes more about me, right? I don't care who you are as a parent. If you tell me you never vicariously live through your kids, I'm like, you're crazy, because I do. Because them doing well is still a reflection on me. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, at the end of the day, I just want them to follow Christ. But if they could be great athletes, then it, and everybody knows I was a good athlete, it's great. So there's all these selfish things that go into it, but those are things I have to surrender. So I wish I missed the singing more, but I've just gotten other things in my life that have kind of been fulfilling to me. And it's something that I cherish. And, look, I'll put on a Sygnature album, and my wife and I'll, we're driving to Hilton Head and we'll listen to it. And I'm like, man, that was awesome. But I'll try to sing along to some of those. And I'm like, I can't hit those notes anymore. Now, I think if you gave me a month and I really put my work into it, I'd be able to. But I'm 53, even the greatest singers, Boyz II Men is not the Boyz II Men they were. They're still awesome, but age is always going to be your ego. And that's sort of kind of where I'm at. But because I think it's not defining me anymore, I'm okay. Like I can look back, like you said, now I'd be like, for the average guy, I had a lot of success. I mean, we had a song go, in the top 50 on the Billboard charts. I mean, I did a song, Wherever You Go, that's on the Best Man soundtrack that went platinum and made some money from that. Like I have some things that other people would only dream of. Right. But that was just a part of my life at that moment. But now my life is it's very different because it's defined by what, or at least I'm trying all the time to have it be defined by what Christ wants. And right now I feel like I'm in the place where I should be. So I don't look back and there aren't a lot of regrets or, it's funny because I never vicariously lived through my kids with singing because I knew how kind of good I was at that. But at anything else where I was like not as good, that's where I'm like, hey, hey kids, let's work on this. So it's a, you know how it is. You have kids. It's a very, that surrender thing is tough, but yeah, I don't miss it that much. And honestly, the end of my drinking was at such a bad place. Before I decided to go to rehab, they describe hell as total separation from God. I was so separated from God, and not that I didn't believe in him, but I was so far removed from him that the emptiness that I had and the anxiety that I felt, I never want to feel again. And I was physically addicted to alcohol. So like I was shaking in the morning, there are things that I can go back to that I never want to go through again. But that emptiness is something that I'll never forget, and I don't ever want to forget. I mean, I'm sure everyone has a story of where they felt like that, but when you're feeling that nervous and that removed from God, and it's that scary, it is not a good place.
Yeah.
And I have so much more peace now than I did then.
Yeah. Well, I will say, I mean, I've heard you several times, and there's no doubt, like you've got skill, you've got ability, you've got a soul to your vocals that are uncommon. To be able to walk away from that in peace is admirable. And to recognize that gift, whether nature or nurture, when you're talking about kids, it's like whatever my kids wanted to do, I wanted to give them every opportunity. Like, we're going to train better than I trained. We're going to eat better than I eat. Can we make the most of your genes? Whether it's nature or nurture kind of doesn't matter, but to be able to wield that gift in a way that's honorable and to not be, like the woulda, coulda, shoulda guy, that's rare. And I want to commend you on that and being able to leave that in the past with peace and with an appreciation for it, for sure. But it's not like this longing. I don't sense in you this deep seated regret. And that's awesome. Like, I really appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, I put a lot, I will say I don't put a lot of pressure on myself for a lot of things, but when it came to singing, I put a lot of pressure on my, I had this drive that I wanted to be the best singer out there, but I was always able to recognize talent. A lot of my life now that I really get enjoyment out of is watching new artists on YouTube or watching them on TikTok. I mean, I can spend hours listening to people singing. I'm just blown. The talent nowadays is amazing. Like, there's a lot of blue-eyed soul out there now. There's a lot of really good. So I still enjoy that. But yeah, I'm just in a new place in my life, and I don't want to neglect my talent that would be able to maybe help introduce the gospel to people. So I am starting to think about, I've got a son that's a senior, and then I have twins that are juniors and they're playing sports. But I've thought about, like, now that it might be time for me to go back and be on the worship team. And that's something, I'll have to go through like a 2-week training camp. But when I was on the worship team, I really did enjoy leading worship. And I felt very comfortable because where I was, I mean, the people knew my story. So, I think it's nice when, someone is broken and that plate that you represent, they're okay with that, and you're being authentic. And for me, it was more about, like, the singing was a pathway for me to share my experience, strength, and hope and what God has done. So if I can use it along with that, I think it would be really good.
I just can't help but think about the redemption in Hayden's story. The guy's been through it, and he's still standing, not by luck, but by love and faith and a lot of hard work. You heard him recount the toll addiction took on his life and his marriage. He and his wife worked through those seasons, rebuilt together. And now, as their once full nest starts to empty, you can hear something different emerging in Hayden's voice. There's a pull towards service. There's joy in the possibility of using his musical gifts again, not to chase a career or to reclaim something that was lost, but to serve God and encourage other people. For Hayden, this has become a story less about regret than formation. The music mattered. The disappointment mattered. The addiction mattered. The recovery mattered. All of it shaped the man he is today. And the best part is his story still isn't finished. He's undone.
But I'm just kind of open to where God is leading me, but I also don't want to sit back and not do something because of fear, or maybe I wasn't good as I was before, because that can also be the devil working against you, so I got to kind of weigh those things and kind of see where God has me go.
Yeah, I appreciate that. If you were to travel back in time and see younger you the week before that meetup with Michael Bivins in that hotel lobby, what wisdom or what advice would you give him for the journey for the years ahead? And how would you prepare him in a way that perhaps he wasn't yet prepared?
Man, that is a terrific question. That's one of the best questions I've ever gotten. I think if I could sit down with the younger Hayden, I think I would really try and stress to him that your image is in Christ, and there's a guy who died on the cross for you because he loved you so much. And your number one priority should be the burden of that cross and not what other people think. And no matter what happens, this life is just a dress rehearsal, right? It goes by quicker than we think, but really ground yourself in that, because you're going to get people that are not going to like you, not enjoy what you do, or put pressure on you to do things. Even when I was singing, like, there's some things, lyrics that I had that were questionable, or things that justification is very easy, right? But like, don't lose who you are, because if you do, you're going to lose yourself. And I don't think you want to lose yourself. And I will say most of the people that I've known who are in the industry, and, I still have some famous people, it's a very hard world to, like, once you're in, to surrender and really get on your knees and say, Christ, you have it all, because you have so much.
Yeah.
And when you have a lot, it's hard to do that, and I think I'm where I'm at, not because of something I did. I think it's because I was at a place where I had so little that I only had the option to surrender. And I'm okay with having little compared to a lot, because staying in that place is good, right? And then I think the other thing I would say is, like, don't think that you can get in the ring with sin. You really just need to run from it and really stay true to who God wants you to be, because it's hard for you and I every day. But I think I would really have that conversation of, like, you are loved at the greatest level, and hold on to that, because you're going to encounter some things that may feel like love, but they're not.
Oof.
And I think for me, I think that's the conversation I would have. And I think the younger Hayden would have been like, okay, dude, I'm about to go sing and make some money and maybe pick up a side chick. I don't know if I would have really listened, but I would have really tried to shake that person and say to them, Mercy Me has that Younger Me song. And I listened to that, and my mom is in heaven, which is like the greatest gift you can have as a child. But I really believe this. I think my mom and she died suddenly, but I think she would have been like, listen, if I need to lose my life so my kid will wake up and realize how important you are, I think that's a decision she would have made. And that is something that I'm thankful for, but I live with. But I think that's how far off I was. And I think now it's like, it's not easy to slip down that rabbit hole, but climbing back up it can be really difficult.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't ever climb back up it. And I think for me, I had to lose it all, I think, or at least almost lose it all, in order to realize how great of a gift God's mercy and love is.
Oh, that's so well said. And isn't that the thing, though? I mean, my coach used to say, it's dead simple, but it's not easy. I would say that salvation is that same way. Like,
I agree.
It is dead simple, but it's such bad business for Christ. Like, why would you give me what you earned and take what I've done. Like
Right.
that's such a terrible trade. I can't even imagine, like I need to earn a little bit of this.
Right.
And for me, it's in the earning where I make the mistakes. I'm trying to be perfect. That can manifest as a way of trying to earn salvation. There's just so many aspects of it.
How do you earn even if you try to earn salvation, it's not salvation.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
I mean, Paul talks about that. I was just reading Galatians and he talks about the Jewish people are telling him you need to be circumcised. And Paul's like, but you don't. You know, like it's not your works, you know, your works are supposed to come from the transformation of Christ and what he does for us. But if you think you're earning salvation, you're not. It's freely given and it's by God's grace. But there is still parts of us today where we feel like I need to go to church on Sunday or I need to read my Bible. And it's hard to understand that like I can't earn this, you know, and it's that is a very hard concept to wrap your mind around, you know, and it's that's very tough. And I think that's something I feel like I have to surrender every day and give up to, because a part of me feels like, well, I still need to earn it. Because with anyone else, you still have to earn it. It's funny. I tell this story when my daughter was born. When she was born, I remember for like 20 seconds, I was like in this moment of like unconditional love. And then I think 30 seconds in, I remember thinking like, I'm not going to get to watch the Browns this season. This baby is going to cry the whole time. And right away I went back to like, it's about me. And you know what I mean? It's like, I had that 20 seconds, but then right away I'm like, man, am I going to get to watch the Buckeyes on Saturday? So it's kind of how we are with our kids. We're like, we're going to love you no matter what.
Yeah.
You know, like my kids don't need to earn my love. I'm going to love them. I'm not going to enable them, but I'm going to love them so much that I'm going to be honest. And like, you're never going to be my favorite because you mowed the lawn or you did something. I'm going to I'm the one guy in your life that wants you to do better than me. And I love you. But that isn't even a morsel of how much God loves us.
Yeah. I heard it explained this way. Like if I were to invite you over to my house and just cook you a lavish meal, you know, Texas brisket, like the whole, all 9 yards, and you enjoy it and it's delicious. And then at the end, you pull out your wallet and you're like, what do I owe you? It's like you've just kind of sullied the whole thing. Like I wanted to honor you.
Yeah. Right.
And in trying to earn it back or you know, like that's kind of what we do when we claim that we can earn it back. And that really was convicting for me. It's like, you know, I just need to have a heart of gratitude. Why can't I just be thankful for what I was given instead of feeling like I have to be perfect and earn it? So,
because we can't. Like it's progress, not perfection. You know, we can't. And like to think that we can, like to say, well, you know, God, I know you died on the cross and you rose again in 3 days. And from Genesis to Revelations, everything you promised is done. But I'm going to try and earn a little too. Cause that I just don't know if that was enough.
Right.
You know, it's like, what do you mean? You know, so I mean, but it's because nowhere else in life does that work. But you know,
or not even that I wasn't enough, that I just don't deserve that.
Right.
Like let me pay you back a little bit because I'm just too depraved to earn it.
Right. Yeah.
Well, this is a question I ask of all my guests. If we were to watch a montage of your life, you know, classic 80s montage, what song would you want to pick to play in the background and why?
80s montage of my life.
It can be any song. It doesn't have to be an 80s song, but.
Yeah, it would probably be, I would say, Boys to Men, It's So Hard to Say Goodbye.
Love it. I told my kids I want that played at my funeral, so.
Yeah. I wouldn't want it to be sad.
Right.
But I think, you know, that
just
might.
To reminisce. To think back. I love it.
Yeah.
I have a Spotify playlist of all my guests. It's like a mixtape that I put in and I drop all those into, and then it'll also be in the episode as well. So I love that one. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming in and sharing your story, vulnerable and brave. I appreciate that. If folks want to watch your work, where can I send them?
I mean, you can go on, I'll post videos on YouTube once in a while. I mean, I have a TikTok, but I don't really, you know, my TikTok is filled with like gospel music and, you know, I skip through all the stuff. But yeah, I would say YouTube. You can just put in Hayden Hajdu and I have stuff in there. If you want to listen to the Sygnature album, you can go to iTunes. The whole album's on there. There's a great duet of me and Beyonce on there.
Awesome.
It's a good album. Yeah. And then I would say there's some of my kids singing on there too, so that's great.
Yeah.
But
Awesome. I will drop those links in the show notes and the description.
Hi, my name's Hayden Hajdu, and I am undone.
Hayden's story has stayed with me because it resists the easy ending. This isn't really a story about a guy who almost made it. It isn't about what the record industry took from him, or even about what might have happened if one or two decisions had gone the other way. Those things matter, but they aren't the point. The point, at least as I heard it, is that Hayden spent years learning the difference between being successful and being whole. There was a time when the music, the record deal, the stages, the approval of other people all seemed like they could answer the questions about who he was and about whether or not his life was worth it. When those things disappeared, the loss was devastating. But somewhere through that disappointment and addiction and recovery and marriage and fatherhood and faith and surrender, Hayden found something sturdier to build on. And what I appreciate most is that he doesn't tell his story from a place of bitterness. He can look back on what happened and acknowledge the pain in it. He can appreciate how extraordinary some of those experiences really were. And he can still be at peace with the life that he has today. That doesn't mean the dream was meaningless. It means that the dream didn't get the final word. Maybe that's one of the harder lessons in Becoming Undone. Sometimes restoration doesn't look like getting back the thing you lost. Sometimes it just looks like becoming someone who no longer needs that thing to tell you who you are. I'm grateful for Hayden and for the fact that he was willing to tell his story, including the parts that were painful and messy and less glamorous than the stages and the record deals and all the stuff that came before them. And I'm especially grateful that all these years later, after I first heard his first couple of lines on One for All for One, I finally got to hear what happened to Hayden. And it turns out the most interesting part of the story came well after the song ended. Thankful to Hayden for dropping in, and I hope you enjoyed our conversation. For more info on today's episode, be sure to check it out on the web. Simply go to undonepodcast.com/EP163 to see the notes, links, and images related to today's guest, Hayden Hajdu. Some quick updates about the show. We're currently number 8 in the world on Apple for self-improvement, number 11 in education. If you'd like to keep tabs on how we're doing in the podcast rankings, head on over to undonepodcast.com/rankings and cheer me on. And if you enjoy the show, the single biggest thing you can do to help is to share an episode with a friend. Leave a rating or review. Every one of those helps more than you know. It's time for the Teal of the Week. I'll keep it quick. I'm rocking a Jacksonville Jaguars teal t-shirt today, and I love it. The color is on brand. It's got the swoosh on the sleeve, which is critical for me. I know there's not a chance in DeVoe that they'll share this, but who knows? Jacksonville Jags, you are my Teal of the Week. Coming up on the show, I've got the millionaire next door, former occupational therapy faculty member, Dr. Matt Getty. I'm also working on some other Biv 10 artists, so wish me luck as I keep reaching out to them. In the meantime, stay tuned. This and more coming up on Becoming Undone. Becoming Undone is a Night Tribe creative production, proud member of the Believe Podcast Network. The show's written and produced by me, Toby Brooks. Intro and outro music by Mark Payne. Tell a friend about the show. Follow along on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Becoming Undone Pod. And follow me at Dr. Toby Brooks on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Check out my link tree at linktr.ee/Dr. Toby Brooks. Listen, subscribe, and leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Till next time, everybody, keep getting better.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.